I want to talk about why so many women end up in unfulfilling relationships, ranging from someone who is emotionally unavailable to the most fascinating of all, which is the narcissists. And I've been watching Dr. Ramani's podcast, which are super good. She focuses on narcissism. However, in her podcast series, she interviews the survivors. How did you feel? How did your relationship begin? Did you see any red flags? And this is why you didn't. Like, it's very considerate and open towards the survivors and lets them really express their feelings. And I got really curious about some of these women's stories. So the two stories on Dr. Ramani's podcast that really caught my attention were the one about Dirty John, and there's a movie made about it. And the other one was the story of the woman who was married to Spencer Heron, and there's a Hulu documentary about it. I'm going to link both of those podcasts in the description of this video so that you can listen to the podcast, hear the woman's point of view, and then go on to watch the movies if you want. In the case of Dirty John, he did try to kill the woman's daughter, and so she's a trauma survivor, and she also was interviewed by Dr. Ramani. So I'm going to link all three of those videos. And I was very curious because those women, the two women that married these men, said they saw no red flags. There were no red flags. They had really good childhoods, and so I got very curious because I always think our gut has to tell us when something's off. And this is what I discovered. We're all walking around in survival strategies that we learned in our childhood. And if your home was very loving, your survival strategies may be pretty intact and healthy. But if you grew up in a home where there was yelling or anger or alcoholism, or a parent abandoned you, your survival strategies that you needed to protect yourself and think your survival strategies would have been things to have no needs, have no wants, speak softly, require nothing, forgive everything, be the perfect child, never get angry. You would have suppressed a lot of your feelings, and you would have suppressed a lot of your emotions to protect yourself. You might go easily into a freeze response, a fawning response, like if your partner, also the case of Anthony Burgos, the Border Patrol agent who was abusive to his wife, but he killed the lover and the baby when they asked for child support. He was very entitled, and so the wife is still talking to him on the phone. She's like, and he's telling her how he's found God and all this, and she's falling for it because, again, to her it probably seems normal to want to forgive. Being forgiving too easily and being understanding are not strengths, you guys. They're survival strategies. True forgiveness comes after you've processed your anger, and you've let it all out, and you've let your sadness out, and you have a healthy boundary. But just forgiving someone who hurt you because they said, "I'm sorry," or "I found God," you won't even know that that's a con artist because your survival strategy won't let you. Now, it's important to thank our survival strategies because they were very useful and kept us safe as children. I have a different survival strategy, which was overlooking things, not knowing I could have needs or wants, not expecting too much, learning to be okay with not having my needs met, not talking about things. Things don't get talked about, we don't talk about difficult things, we push them under the rug. All those kinds of things are survival strategies. And so then we don't realize when we get into relationships with someone that are going to make us really unhappy, because those relationships are always fraught with despair or pain or violence or emotional neglect. So the key is to learn about your emotions and start tuning into them and abandon those survival strategies because they don't serve us in adulthood. They're survival strategies for emergencies. And for a lot of us, our parental homes were emergencies to some extent because people didn't know about emotions and trauma. Like, emotions were something you weren't supposed to have when I was growing up, but they really give us a lot of insight. So in the case of the woman who was married to Dirty John, I think her survival strategy was being the good girl and speaking softly. I don't have any expectations. I don't have any anger. I'm sweet. I'm forgiving. Nobody means any harm. So she repressed her natural boundaries, her natural anger, and allowed men to walk all over her. And another thing you guys have to do is see the flaws your parents had. Like this Debbie woman, she was very protective of her parents. Your perfect childhood. If you can't see your parents' flaws, you can't see your survival strategies. So this is hard for a lot of people. In the case of the woman who married Spencer Heron and the woman who was married to the Border Patrol agent, I think that they never challenged anything. Okay, Spencer Heron woman, she was the producer of Extreme Home Makeover, I guess. He love bombed her. So I'll get into that in a second. But when you never challenge your partner, you don't understand how they're going to react when you tell them no, when you give a boundary, or when you disagree. Now that he's in prison after having cheated on her over 75 times and sexually assaulted his high school students, he's like very belligerent, that this was not his fault and all this, but I don't think she ever saw that because she never challenged him. She was the nice girl, and nice girls have a survival strategy. We don't challenge. Same goes for you nice guys out there. I don't challenge anything. You're afraid to challenge. You either don't know you can, or you actually are consciously afraid because someone could get mad at you or they might abandon you. So that's a part of you have to get in touch with, is challenging people. You've got to practice challenging people and having boundaries and saying no, because you want to test how this person's going to react when you give them a boundary. And abusive people and narcissists do not like boundaries. In the case of me, I knew what my ex-husband's weaknesses were. I married him anyway, so I take responsibility. But these women didn't even know what the problem was. Another thing too about the love bombing, these women who it was just so much love, I loved it. It's very unhealthy to be so needy and to instantly grab onto someone like a life raft. Like when I hear these stories of we met and we haven't been separate ever since, that's unhealthy. That's needing someone as your life raft. A healthy relationship has distance and spaces between the people. It allows people to have different opinions, and I think that a really good way to practice all this stuff, you guys, is with same-sex friendships, with people who also want to express their boundaries, and to practice. What happens if I say no? How do I tell no to a friend without hurting their feelings? How do I express myself? And if I express myself and I'm afraid they'll get mad at me, how can I handle that? We got to practice these new muscles. There's a book I highly recommend called The Language of Emotions. But I'm going to say I had some really bad survival strategies. I thought that, I used my family relationship skills when I was dating men after my divorce. I happened to get a good guy when I was married, not perfect because we got divorced, but he treated me well, but he never ghosted me. But when these guys would ghost me, I would go into a fawning mode. Every few days I might text them and go, hey, I really do like you. Because growing up, I guess we didn't talk about our boundaries or what we didn't like. We just reassured each other that we still liked each other, which is really unhealthy. And that's not the way to be in dating. One other time I met this guy, I'd been talking to him for a while, and we met for coffee, and he purposely dressed down and his car hadn't been cleaned and all that. And I was bound and determined that I wasn't going to reject him just because he didn't put his best foot forward. I can still accept you. I also had other strategies of, if men texted me, I would text them back right away to reassure them. So I was reassuring, I was fawning, I was overlooking, and maybe being a helper to some extent, So notice how you're responding, because in a healthy relationship, people can just enjoy each other's company. Like, there shouldn't be someone asking you for help or for money. People you don't know should not be coming to you for help or for money or for emotional support. Those are all kind of red flags that people with survival strategies get sucked into. Like, oh, I'm the helper. Oh, I'm afraid to say no to this guy because he'll leave me, so I'm going to keep giving him money. I'm the helper. And a lot of women, I used to do coaching. I know that there are a lot of women who grew up in homes where they had to, like, calm their parents down who were alcoholics or something. They're the helpers. They learn to protect a sibling or learn to protect a parent, so they're automatically going to helper mode. And they have, that's how you end up women who fall in love with prisoners or alcoholics. Like, ooh, I can help him. Really watch out for that. That is a survival strategy. That is not a healthy relationship strategy. So to sum it up, if you do any of the following, these are survival strategies, but add more in the comments that I haven't thought about. Fawning, being too agreeable, being kind, never getting angry, not making requests, holding onto someone like a life raft, putting someone on a pedestal, being okay with, pushing away your feelings, being afraid to tell someone how you feel or what you need. Being afraid to be alone is a huge red flag too, a survival strategy, because those people cannot be alone, so they'll do anything to be in a relationship. Those are just some I'm thinking off right off the bat. But anyway, thanks for watching my video. I'll see you guys next time. Okay, another aspect that I forgot to cover in my other video has to do with programming. That's what we saw growing up. That's what we were taught. It's not necessarily a survival strategy. It's what we were modeled, what was expected of us. Something like, good girls are agreeable. Religious, spiritual women are forgiving. So we're taught these lessons either through church or through our home life. And then also how we saw our parents treat each other. Like in my case, my dad was like, he's Persian, and he's like a little bit dominating, impatient, a little bit controlling. And if things didn't go his way, he felt entitled to have a little outburst. It would be pretty quick and not super scary, but he would feel entitled to have them. And he always got women who were like agreeable and kind, pretty and intelligent, like my mom and my stepmom. So what I saw growing up was the man is in charge. And this is like, I think for a lot of like relationships, what we call the patriarchy, I think was pretty typical, where the guy is in charge and the woman kind of is agreeable and submissive and kind. And, you also can think of the extreme as the wife of the alcoholic. She keeps trying to fix him and cover up for him and overlook. And she has no needs. Her whole worth is wrapped up in trying to fix him and get his love and get his approval. You also think of like the male narcissist and the kind of codependent spouse. These kind of relationships, and that what I saw growing up where the man is in charge, kind of taught me that, I should be pleasing to men. I should like what the man likes. I should, be receptive and pleasing and submissive. And, of course, we had our roles. The man worked, the woman was at home. And in porn, we also see this thing of the woman performing for the man. Guys, I hope you realize that porn is fake. These women are not enjoying what is happening, okay? Most of what's happening in porn is extremely uncomfortable for the woman and unpleasant for the woman. And I know, as having worked in that industry, and having a very popular Just for Fans, which, by the way, if you want to find my Just for Fans, you have to make an account at Just for Fans, and then you have to look for me, because I don't give that out. It's a separate thing. But I'm telling you, I work with men. I talk with men. I know I follow the sex work industry somewhat. I have other friends in that industry. I have worked with men one-on-one Okay, so I am telling you, a lot of this stuff is super fake, but that's what we see, you know, women performing sexually for men, not even knowing what we like. So that all sets women up to be like in a fawning codependent position, which makes them really unfulfilled in their relationships. And that's why 80% of divorces are filed by women. And I blame us for that, because we got into relationships with men, not bringing all of our emotions into it and not knowing what an emotional, desolate landscape it was, because we came into it emotionally desolate ourselves, not knowing that we were blind, having all these blind spots. Okay, so I'm not blaming women, I'm just saying we caused this also. That's why I really recommend this book, The Language of Emotions, because we need emotions to have fulfilling relationships and to have fulfilling lives. We need to honor our emotions. But the reason we don't is because we're taught from a young age, from all around society, that emotions are messy and they're scary and they're weak and we shouldn't have them. And so we push away all of these signals that tell us. Anger tells us our boundary was violated. Sadness tells us that grief has to flow out of us. Like, our emotions tell us things, and we're raised in our society that they're bad, or that certain emotions are bad. So you see people walking around like this, or in a mask of smiling. Even depressed people can walk around smiling because they think that's socially approved. They feel uncomfortable showing anything else. And then people are uncomfortable with their own emotions or handling other people's emotions. So if someone comes to you and tells you they're sad, you try to cheer them up instead of allowing them to let the sadness be there, because it'll flow out. Like, we have to learn to deal with our emotions. And anger, for example, I just want to make a quick side tour. Anger, for example, is not something that you repress and hate yourself or blast out at someone, which is complete disrespect of their boundaries and your own boundary. If you can imagine yourself as like a boundary bubble around you, like a big boundary bubble, and you can put like a big color in it. And when you get angry, just put your anger in that boundary, because it's got to come out of you like, ah! You can make noise or throw things at it and just get all angry in your boundary. And then once your anger has come out, then you can deal with the situation at hand. Okay, so but your anger is letting you know a boundary has been violated. But none of us were taught this stuff. So that's why I really recommend that book. So people are programmed to learn that there are bad feelings, good girls behave a certain way, good guys behave a certain way. If you were raised by a controlling dad like I was, then the man is on a pedestal. If you were raised by a single mom, you probably have mom on a pedestal. You never saw a strong male role model, so you think the role of men is to please the woman, to be pleasing to mom. But if you get in a relationship with the woman, you're a people pleaser, you're going to be so repulsive. You will not be having any sex after a short period of time. Women do not like this. And it's a very people pleasing, and being agreeable is very unhealthy behavior. But we don't even know we're doing it, right? Because we were taught, like programmed, or we saw that growing up. We were either taught that or we saw that. So that's the programming. Now, there are also the survival strategies, which I talked about before. And the survival strategies are things that were like maybe unspoken in the family, or ways that we adapted to family life. Like in my family growing up, we would just like have an argument, and then maybe not talk to each other for a few hours, and then talk to each other again and pretend nothing ever happened. And so I did that in my marriage. Like, we would get mad at each other, we wouldn't talk for 3 days, and then we would pick up where we left off. That's not healthy. Not talking about things, being afraid to bring things up. And that's how people end up in these unhealthy relationships. They either overlook the red flags, or they didn't even see the red flags. They didn't see the red flags because they're in their survival strategy. And what I want to suggest to you this, that instead of looking for red flags in other people, look for the red flags in you. Okay, I'm going to give you some red flags in me. What were my red flags? Okay, thinking, projecting a fantasy onto men that I didn't even know. Okay, if I project a fantasy onto someone that I don't even know, that's a red flag. If I put someone on a pedestal, that's a red flag. If I don't feel comfortable telling you what my needs are or my desires or what I want to do, I'm a red flag. If I don't feel comfortable challenging you or disagreeing with you, that's a red flag. Because those women in the videos, they didn't disagree with the guys, because the moment they disagreed, you could see that the guy turned it around on them, blamed them. He could take no accountability for anything. But they didn't see that because they were in a survival strategy of being agreeable. They were their own red flag. And we do not see where we are a red flag. And when I am saying we are a red flag, I'm not speaking of people who are abusive. I'm talking about people who are the opposite. They're more on the fawning, codependent, agreeable side. And when we're agreeable, we put up with a lot. We don't realize we're putting up a lot because the survival strategy is, I can deal with this. I can be okay with this. I can grovel for this. Groveling. Okay, so I spent all my pain with men came from fawning. I would like these guys. They were never mean to me, but they just weren't interested. They might have lived far away or they didn't even know I existed. And I thought, if I just, I got so comfortable in the pain of the fawning and the longing and waiting for a letter to come. This was back when people were still writing letters, like in the 70s or 80s, waiting for a letter. Oh my God, there's finally a letter from this guy, who lived many states away. Or some guy I had sex with after my divorce and then he blew me off and like, oh my God, he finally texted me. Like, why was I interested in someone who was so unavailable? And that's why I don't want to deal with men who just email me or whatever. Like, I want to be, I'm clearing for people who are actually available to me, physically available, mentally and emotionally available, but I wasn't always. So let's go over some more survival strategies. Being agreeable, being too kind, forgiving. Forgiving is a survival strategy. Why should I forgive you? Forgiving is something that happens after all the anger and the sadness has been processed, and that person actually deserves to be in my life. You don't forgive someone for hitting you, like the Burgos wife, or forgive someone for punching holes in the wall. Like, why are you going to be with this person who's so violent? Not making requests. A survival strategy is, I'm not going to ask for anything. I have no needs. I'm going to be the good boy, the good girl in the background. I have no needs. If I have no needs, you will love me. That's a survival strategy. If I do whatever you want, you will love me. That's a survival strategy, you guys. If I can just be okay with whatever you do, you will love me. If I can perform for you in bed and please you in bed and be wild in bed, you will love me. If I have no needs, if I never get angry, if I do whatever you want, you will love me. If I caretake you, if I take care of you, if I do things for you that you as an adult should be able to do for yourself, like act as your therapist, pay your bills, do things for my adult kids, like pay for their stuff, you will love me. Those are all survival strategies. If I'm afraid to be alone, that's a survival strategy. Have you ever heard of people who are like, oh my God, they met and they were inseparable? Being afraid to be alone is a survival strategy. It signals anxious attachment. It's like, we're our own red flags, you guys. Now, I'm not saying that I did all these things. I'm just using I statements so you can kind of get the flow of it. Also, I must prove myself. I must keep doing things for you, is a red flag. So I think the way to see our own red flags is like through books like that, or doing like seeing a somatic experiencing coach. I recently had a somatic experience session, which was so amazing because it was with someone in person, and as this person was moving around in different spaces around me, like, how do you feel? I started being in tune with parts of my emotions that I didn't even know I had. Like, oh, when you're behind me, I feel a little bit afraid. When you're here, I feel this side versus this side. And like, okay, can you? And I said to this therapist, somatic experience practitioner, okay, now how about if you put your hand on my hand? And when that person put the hand on my hand, I felt this really nourishing energy like I had from my mom. At the same time, I felt this huge wall of resistance. And it reminded me of how, as a little girl, I really resisted my mom because sometimes she would be impatient and lose her temper with us and yell at us. And a lot of that is because my dad was a piece of shit and she had 3 kids in 4 years. Like, my mom is amazing. However, she had more on her plate than she could handle, and she would sometimes, I'm making apologies for her. However, my experience as a child was this very loving, nourishing mother, who really loved us and hugged us and was there, who would sometimes lose her temper. So it was like, I was like, I'm not going to let her love me. I'm not going to let her know that she bothers me. I put up a wall, and I felt that wall. And then it got me curious about how I interacted in some other situations where I would get annoyed with men. And I thought, well, maybe that comes from me feeling really disappointed rather than annoyed. And maybe it was me projecting what I didn't get from my dad. But all this woke up from one session with a somatic experience practitioner. So I'm going to do another session to see what else I discover. But what I realized through this was all these years of trying to do all this work on a mental level or trying to calm my reactivity, none of this was working. It was through actually experiencing it in my body of like, what am I experiencing? That some new insights opened up for me. And that's why I'm saying, like, really, like, it helped me get in touch with my emotions that had been numbed. Because a lot of my emotions had been numbed, because that was my survival strategy as a child. We weren't allowed to have emotions. Children growing up in the 60s were supposed to be seen and not heard. Emotions were not welcome. Parents were really frazzled, and the last thing they wanted to deal with was a child that had needs or a child that was crying. We were not asked what were our needs. We weren't allowed to have needs. We were supposed to be obedient, and we weren't asked for our opinions, so that's why these are survival strategies. They are not helpful as adults, and they're not helpful in flourishing. So we got to wake up these parts of ourselves that are numbed. Women have to wake up to their pleasure. Like during intercourse, what do you like? Guys are so quick to just try to ram it in there. And women are allowing it, even before they're ready, And there's another thing, I'm taking this course on cervical orgasms, and because I'm very intrigued by that, but that doesn't happen from quick, anxious ramming. That happens with slow penetration where the woman is just allowed to open and she's just kind of getting that gentle pressure on her cervix. It's not from all that anxious, frantic ramming, and it's different from, because the clitoral orgasm is like a quick release thing, but the cervical orgasm is more like waves that can go on for hours and that bring out this much deeper spiritual aspect for a woman. And I've had several women explaining it to me, and I'm very intrigued by it. But that's a deep mystical part of us that we can't come in touch with when we're just trying to perform or please for the man. So coming in touch with our inner emotional world just makes us more richer beings. I hope this video has been super helpful. Again, it's like our own red flags are being uncomfortable with emotions, being afraid of people, or being afraid to be alone, or not knowing we have needs, and having cut off our emotions. Like, we are all red flags, and the more we can, I think, tune into our emotions especially and trust them. That's, I think, the work of this century. And trust them and work with them. Then we will automatically pick up on the red flags in other people who don't resonate with us. You know, like people who keep ending up with narcissists, it's because they're so agreeable. They think that they're being good people because they're in their head, I gotta be nice. They have completely cut off the parts of themselves that are allowed to get angry, that are allowed to have boundaries, that are allowed to say no. They're just caretaking people pleaser nice girls, because those narcissists need people like that. And narcissists would never want me, because we would never last past a 2-minute conversation. They need someone who's agreeable, who's cut off from their own anger, because anger is a boundary. Someone who has no boundaries, someone who doesn't know how to work with their emotions because they've been cut off. And it's not your fault. It's just the way that the world was. I mean, emotions is that's like a language that a lot of us are just kind of like taking baby steps in even feeling and knowing how to express in a healthy way. So I'm going to call this video, What Are My Red Flags? Survival strategies, something or other. If you have a topic for video, feel free to email me, sharzadmorgan@gmail.com. If you have a personal question that you want help with, please send a PayPal payment along with your email for personal questions. Otherwise, at least $100. My PayPal is sharzadmorgan@gmail.com. Otherwise, if you just have a topic for a video, please send that. If you have an interest in meeting me, interacting with me in a romantic way or something, I'm not interested in that at all. That is my boundary. I am available and interested in meeting younger men. I'm thinking 35 to 45 that are really into fitness, that are like full of vitality and happy with their lives, that live within a 10-minute drive of me, so that we can see each other and cook together and go on runs. And younger men are a lot more emotionally attuned because they grew up in an era where emotions were allowed. So they have less work to do on that. And I do love younger men. I like them. I tend to go for the tall, lean type of body type, white guys, and blonde-haired guys especially. I like younger, good energy. You got a good job, like you got stuff going on, and you happen to be into older women. So I'm working on my own stuff. Like, okay, if I see a guy like that, I'm just going to start a conversation and make the first move and just start a conversation and see if he asks me out. It would be really nice to date somebody who wants to be like an equal with me energetically. And so that's kind of one thing I'm working on. Is like, oh, okay, if I see a good looking guy, I'm not going to be afraid to say hi. I'm going to strike up a conversation. And again, just putting the boundary out there for guys who watch my videos that if you feel like reaching out to women on social media, why are you doing that? What's your survival strategy? Women are not safe unless they're unapproachable. This is all the intimacy I can handle is some woman online, some fantasy woman online. That's a survival strategy. So, what are you willing to face in yourself? What are you willing to overcome? What are you willing to conquer? Where are you willing to get out of your comfort zone? That's your red flag. If you're contacting women online for relationships or for attention, you're a red flag too, So look at your own red flags. I'm not interested in men with all these glaring red flags. I'm looking for emotionally healthy men, and emotionally healthy men want to be with women that they can actually see in real life and cook with and go to dinner with and interact with. So that's what I'm a yes to. And thank you so much for watching my video.